Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome along to our first Dean's Lecture in 2018. It's fantastic to have such a big crowd here, and I thank you for coming along. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet tonight, who are Wurundjeri people from the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge their ancestors past, present and emerging, and also pay my respect to any Indigenous Australians that might be present. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Jim Waterston, the new Dean, and I'm loath to refer to the old Dean, but I'd like to acknowledge Field Rickard, who's in the audience with us, my predecessor, who's had a long history here and has certainly been very familiar and front and centre for our Dean's Lectures in the past. In fact, my only association, I think, with the Graduate School of Education previously was to attend a few Dean's Lectures at the invitation of Field, so it's wonderful to be out the front and have Field sitting here as well, so welcome along Field and to everyone else. Can I also acknowledge Professor Leslie Farrell for her support in helping me to select our presenters of the Dean's Lectures for this year, and Leslie's away on holidays, which is great for her, but I'm sure she would have loved to have been here. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Marc Brackett tonight. I had a little opportunity this afternoon to spend 30 minutes with Marc, and so I kind of thought it was a bit of a personal counselling session by the time we finished. I'm not sure that talking about my regulation of emotions and my emotional intelligence, I kind of figured with the crowd here, I count for two people, because there's my rational self that's turned up tonight, but there's also that certainly emotionally unregulated person that also lives in my body and fights for space, that kind of person that cries when Dean and Tracy break up on Married at First Sight, those kind of things. So I've brought both of them along tonight, and I'm hoping Marc can settle it so that the rational person takes over. I do have the pleasure of introducing Marc, and I'm going to just read this so that I get it right, because he's got an illustrious history and past record, and listening to his story about his school experience and the way that he's been able to use that experience to motivate himself and to be able to bring about better opportunities for young people as he's gone forward, I think is quite inspirational. Marc's research has focused on the role of emotional intelligence in learning, decision-making, relationship quality and wellbeing. Marc has received numerous awards for his research on social and emotional learning, and is a distinguished scientist on the National Commission of Social, Emotional and Academic Development. Marc has pioneered an evidence-based approach to social and emotional learning that has been adopted by over 1,500 public, government-funded and private schools in Australia, China, England, Italy, Mexico, Spain and Sri Lanka. And talking with Marc, that number of countries and number of schools is growing all of the time as people discover this work and realise how important it is in that school sector. So it's great to have Marc along, but also great to have Marc working with Australian schools and being able to change some of the trajectory of young people's lives. Marc's level of expertise is not only sought in schools all over the world, but also in workplaces. He regularly consults on with internationally renowned companies such as Facebook and Google. You may want to rethink the Facebook based on their use of data, but certainly Google seems okay at this point. On best practices for integrating the principles of emotional intelligence into training and product design. With Facebook, he has developed products including social resolution tools for adults and youth to resolve online conflict, and other resources to support high school students in leading positive change in their schools. If you're not impressed yet, Marc also holds a 5th degree black belt in the Korean martial art of Hapkido. So anyone gets out of line tonight, expect to be put back into line very quickly. Without any further ado, I would like to, with great pleasure and pride and privilege in being in this position, invite Marc now to come forward and present tonight's lecture, Creating an Emotional Revolution from Schools to the Workplace in Society. Thank you, Marc.
Thank you. God, that's a nice introduction. Thank you. So how are we feeling tonight? Good? That's your emotion language? First, I want to thank Erica Freidenberg, because if it wasn't for Erica, I would not actually do any work in Australia. We met at a conference in America about a decade ago and have become friends ever since, and I just want to acknowledge that. So let me just share with you a little bit about our center. the goal of our center is pretty straightforward. It's to use the power of emotions to create a healthier. How many of you believe, just for curiosity, that even in Australia, people could be a little bit more psychologically or physically healthier? All right, good. Equitable. How many of you feel like there's some need for equity in schools and workplaces and salaries and gender and race? Productivity for us is kind of a big bucket. Innovation, creativity, effectiveness in the workplace, in schools. And then finally, one of our major goals is just to make the world a bit more compassionate. Anyone think that we could use some of that now? In our own country, I won't even begin to describe what's going on. Forget about Facebook, we got bigger problems than that. All right. So with that said, I'm going to ask all of you to sit up straight, please. Get good posture in your seats. Now, most of you probably came to hear me speak because maybe you're interested in what this might look like in a school or a classroom. And that's where my work is primarily. But what I want to do is get really narrowly focused right now. I'm going to ask you to take a moment and just think about a child who you know. Your own child, if you're a teacher, maybe a student in your school or classroom. And I'm going to ask you for the next 1 minute to become that child. So I'm going to ask you to live vicariously through that child. Okay? You can close your eyes if you're comfortable. I think we're in a safe place, but you don't have to. Please take a nice long inhale. I can't even hear you breathing. All right, let it go. Just relax. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning, and you wake up as this child. How do you feel? Just in your head, in your mind. Are you waking up in a beautiful home or a home that doesn't look so great? Do you have parents or do you not have parents? Who's taking care of you? It's breakfast time. What are you having for breakfast? Is it a healthy breakfast? It is an unhealthy breakfast. How are you feeling at breakfast? Rich conversation, no conversation, being yelled at, screamed at? Maybe you're out for breakfast at a cute little place in South Yarra having your poached eggs with gluten-free toast and smashed avocado and paying $25 and having acid reflux just from the thought of paying that much money for breakfast like I had this week. Or maybe not. Maybe you're not eating breakfast. Maybe you're getting something quickly because you don't have the resources to have a healthy breakfast. All right, now you're on your way to school. What is the commute like for you? Is it easy or is it difficult? You arrive at your school. You open the door and you walk around. Do you feel welcome or do you feel unwelcome? Do you feel excited about learning that day or do you feel kind of like whatever? Class 1, Class 2, Class 3. How are you feeling? From maths to science, social studies, whatever you're learning, how are you feeling as a student in that classroom? What are your relationships like with your different teachers? What about your peer group? How are you feeling? It's lunchtime. How's it going for lunch? Enjoyable lunch, healthy lunch, unhealthy lunch? Are you interacting with other people? Are you sitting alone? Are you looking for a seat? Are you being excluded? Are you connected? Afternoon, more classes. Tests, no tests. Maybe you don't even care about the tests. It's the end of the school day. Where are you going? After school program? Walking on the streets? Tutor? Home? All right, you're home. What are you doing? What's your evening look like? What does it feel like? Who are you looking at? What are you talking about? Homework? No homework? Maybe you don't care about your homework. Late evening. What's going on? Are you alone or are you with your family? Are you interacting and having rich conversations about what happened that day? Or are you locked in your room texting and on social media? All right, it's time to go to bed. You're getting into bed, you're putting your head on your pillow. How are you feeling right before you go to sleep at night? So I know you're thinking, I want you to tell me you're supposed to be lecturing. But for the next 30 seconds, I'm going to ask you to turn to someone next to you, and I just want you to share what you saw doing that little reflection. Please go ahead. Okay, let's come back together, please. So we're going to play a little game for 20 seconds. And that little game is going to be me watching people in the room raise their hands, and I'm going to ask you to summarize what you visualize in one word. What's one word that you would use to describe the emotional roller coaster ride of the child that you were visualizing? Okay, we're going to go. Sir?
Conflicted.
Conflicted. Someone else?
Anxious.
Anxious.
Tumultuous.
Tumultuous.
Changeable.
Changeable.
Exhausting.
Exhausting. Lonely. Traumatic. Overloaded. Bored. Frustrated. Recollection. Unsure. Predictable. Happy. We're going to stop there. We got one. Right. So, interesting thinking about that, right? I didn't ask you to think about a child who was traumatized or anything. I just said think of a child. But yet, many of us, as we think about children's lives, we think about their lives in school and beyond, and we come up with words like tumultuous and conflicted and etc. So I've been really curious in my own career about how people feel. And the reason why I was curious is because I never felt positive in school. I just didn't have a good experience. I was a kid who I had parents going through difficult times. I had older brothers. One had physical illness. The other one had mental illness. They left when I was a very young child. My parents were suffering because my mother blamed herself for my brother's misfortunes and lots of challenges. And I was bullied in my middle school. And so I didn't have a lot of positive emotional experiences, unfortunately, in school. And I've been curious to know, like, maybe have things changed? Like, maybe that I was an anomaly. So I did a study 2 years ago where I looked at 45,000 high school students across America, every single state. And we looked at government schools, and we looked at private schools and religious schools. And we asked these young adults, tell us in your own words, how does it feel to be a student in your school? And just write the words. Just write them out. We gave them to, we said, write 3 of them. And here's what we found in terms of the percentage. If we categorize them with objective ratings of kind of pleasant or unpleasant or negative emotions. Anyone have a guess about the percentage of positive to negative?
80-20.
It was 75% negative, 23% positive. So then we looked at the data more specifically and we said, well, what are the top emotions? Anyone want to guess the top 3 emotions? This is in America, whether it sounds a little bit familiar here. Top 3 emotions. I have no idea what anybody said, so I'll just show you. Tired, bored, and stressed. We did get some happiness that came in 4th. Top 3 emotions, tired, bored, and stressed, and that accounted for the 75% pretty much. So ask all of you to think about that for a minute. How many of you believe that tired and boredom and stress is like a recipe for creativity and innovation? Think about it. And what's interesting to me is that it's not like I'm tired at 7 a.m. when I get up and go to school and I'm bored in class period 3 and I'm stressed at the end of the day. Think about what your brain is doing when you're tired, bored, and stressed, tired, bored, and stressed, tired, bored, and stressed, tired, bored, and stressed, tired, bored, and stressed. It's a lot of energy going into feeling unpleasant feelings. Now, I work at a university that you've heard of before. It's called Yale. It's very much like this university, except our university costs a ridiculous amount of money to go to. It's about $70,000 US a year to be a student in our school. And I figured that, my goodness, if you go to Yale, you must be like the happiest crayon in the box. So what do you think are the top 3 emotions of our Yale undergraduates? No. You can't be bored if you take my class, right? There's not a lot of boredom.
Okay.
But stressed and overwhelmed were the top 2. Now, we also went to look at the data for both high school students and college students, and we wanted to look at the data, kind of disaggregate it a little bit. So we started to look at things like gender identity. The partner that I had in this research project was someone who was able to get me a large sample of diverse students. It was the pop singer Lady Gaga and her foundation. So she was able to get the message out about the study, and within 1 month, we got about 10,000 LGBTQ students. And we asked them, so tell us, the same questions. And then we compared them to the the gender conformist, or the typical gender. And what we find is the following. It's hard to see a little bit, but the yellow or the orange represents males, the reddish color represents females, the blue represents children who identify as transgender, and the darker color, the reddish darker color, represents people who see themselves as more gender diverse. And as you can see, the more kind of complex your gender identity is, the less happiness you have, the more anxiety you have, and the more depression you have. Same thing goes for sexual orientation. So the more diverse you see yourself in terms of your sexual orientation, from heterosexual to lesbian, gay, to bisexual to other, same pattern. We just finished publishing these studies and looking at different aspects of students' lives. Now, if you go into socioeconomic status, which I think is an important factor to look at, this is why I think looking at discrete emotions is important and not looking at global emotions. Firstly, in the paper that we published on the children who were tired and bored and stressed, the reviewer said, we can't publish this paper in the Journal of Emotion because tired isn't an emotion. I was like, everybody said they're tired. Like, I don't care if you want to call it an emotion or a feeling or a mood or a state or whatever. Like, that's what the kids are saying is what they're experiencing. So we'll call it something different. But nevertheless, we're not going to not publish the findings because we asked them how they felt and they didn't use what a scientist would say is a feeling. It's kind of interesting. It's a whole other story. I'm not going to go there right now because I'll get aggravated. So if we look at global measures of positive and negative affect, just global measures is a tool that's called the PANAS. It's the Positive and Negative Affect Schedule. It measures kind of global positivity and negativity. What you find is something quite interesting. The children who are at the lowest, this is a ladder of socioeconomic status. This is your lowest and this is the highest. They're feeling the blue, which are positive emotions, in general, about 35% of the time. Whereas if you're at the higher SES, you're feeling positive emotions about 60% of the time. That's a significant difference. The opposite is true for negative emotions. 55% negative emotions, and about 35% for the kids who are higher in SES. What I found really interesting was that we were really focused on the stress and boredom, because those were the top emotions. We didn't have tired in our surveys, because we also didn't think tired was a feeling, but nevertheless, that's what came up from their own words. But look at the the stressed and bored. Almost, think about that, stressed 85% of the time. And it only drops a little bit. Boredom, pretty flat. So what that tells us a little bit is that the stress and boredom is kind of ubiquitous in school. Whereas our general kind of well-being or positive or negative affect does seem to have more variability in terms of our socioeconomic status. Now, we asked more items in these studies. We wanted to look at different aspects of emotional life and different aspects of your school life. So because I was a kid who was pretty horrifically bullied, I wanted to know, do kids who have meanness and cruelty have different emotional experiences? Here's what you should know. Your answer to the question, someone has been mean or cruel to me in the last week, you're scoring that item. The correlation with that item and feeling hopelessness was 0.56. That's a pretty strong association between feeling hopeless. Think about it, not just tired and bored or negative emotions, but hopeless, despair, 0.56. On the other hand, saying I have positive relationships, I feel accepted and connected. I have engaging instruction, I'm hopeful and interested. What I'm learning is relevant and meaningful. That was the number one finding that we had, that the most positive emotions were associated with kids saying, what I'm learning is relevant and meaningful to my personal goals. Just keep that in mind as well. And then here's the college student data that I jumped ahead of and shared. Stressed, overwhelmed. I predicted they were going to be happy. They were going to be proud. But here is the state of affairs of a university where you're paying all that money to go to. And so because I teach these courses, I interviewed kids. And I said, what's going on? I'm not as smart as everybody else. I'm an imposter. Huge problem. I got in, I was lucky. I was one of the lucky ones, right? I was I went to this, I was valedictorian of this kind of school, but they went to that school. My father is not a senator. My father is not this famous person. I can't believe how much people work here. They just work all the time, like nobody sleeps. Endless amounts of stress. Even in my own course, when I ask students to think about this work, they say things like, I don't know, I get it, but I'm not going to do it. I'm like, what do you mean you're going to do it? Like one of my students last year, she said to me, now you're asking me to write breathe on my to-do list. It's crazy. And then they said to me, well, when I get into law school or medical school, that's when I can use these strategies of emotional intelligence. Right? I said, I work with those students. Let me tell you that you not got much to look forward to. And then it's no, when I work with the medical students, no. Once I get my internship. And think about it, everybody's waiting to experience more pleasant emotions until the next phase of their life, and then you end up, as we know where. When we ask students how they want to feel, they're pretty straightforward. They want to feel happy, inspired, accomplished, proud, and challenged, and the list goes on. All right, so that's the state of our students, high school students and college students. So I went on to study teachers. I'm really interested in teachers' emotional lives. So what I did was I got a grant, and I worked with a group, and we studied 6,000 teachers last year. And we asked the teachers the same exact questions we asked the kids, some modifications. What do you think are the top emotions of our nation's teachers? Everybody's so optimistic. I thought you were into positive psychology here. There is the teaching profession in the United States. Frustrated, stressed, overwhelmed. There is some happiness. But 66 to 70% of the emotions were categorized as unpleasant or negative emotions. Top one was frustrated. When we asked them why, they felt they were inadequately prepared to deal with the emotional challenges that they have in their classrooms, with classroom management, that they felt like they weren't appreciated by their administration, that they had constant changing in this thing and that thing, and they can never get themselves kind of prepared. So we wanted to go a step further with our teachers, and what we did was we looked at their climate of their school. So school climate can be measured in a number of ways. The way we assessed it in this particular study was really around the relationships that they have with their supervisors or their principals and their peers, and as well as their students. So in general, the relationship quality they perceive having in their school. And what we found was that that was the single number one predictor of their negative emotional states. Unfortunately, it went a step further, which was that we used items from the Center for Disease Control and others to look at other kinds of what you might call outcomes or associations. And we found was indeed, unhealthy climate led to burnout, less job satisfaction, and it was mediated through that pathway of more negative emotions. But it went a little further too, because the teachers who were experiencing more negative emotions and coming from schools where there was a poor climate also said they're having sleep trouble. They also said they're having stress-related absence, like I'm taking a day off, like I'm not feeling so well, I don't really want to, stress is too much for me. And they're also reporting greater levels of anxiety and depression. Something to think about? I think so. Think about that. Tired, bored, and stressed for our kids. College students are stressed and overwhelmed. Teachers are frustrated, overwhelmed, and stressed. So how do you think teachers want to feel? I'll tell you. They, like everyone else, they want to feel more positive emotions. They want to be happy, and appreciated came up as a big one. I just want to feel valued and appreciated in my job. Nobody, I can relate to that. Like, the further you go in your career, like now that I'm a director of the center, I rarely get someone and say, Marc, thank you. I appreciate you. But it's sort of like, am I getting a raise? Right? And now with the millennials, right, it's like, excuse me, I thought I was going to be assistant director within the first 6 months. But it's like, wait a minute here. It took me 15 years. But nevertheless, happy, appreciated, excited, respected, supported. Now let's take a moment and think about this. Frustrated, overwhelmed, stressed, happy, appreciated, valued. I'm going to ask you to embody these emotions for a minute. Can I ask everyone to please maybe close your eyes again and take a nice long inhale? And I'm going to ask you to listen to my voice. Frustrated, overwhelmed, stressed. Frustrated, overwhelmed, stressed. Frustrated, overwhelmed, and stressed. Frustrated, overwhelmed, and stressed. Please take a nice, long, slow inhale and an exhale. I feel happy. I feel supported. I feel respected. I feel appreciated. I feel energized. I feel accomplished. You may open your eyes now. Did anyone feel the difference? It's like emotions are embodied, aren't they? So you can imagine what it's like for an individual who is in their school feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, and stressed all the time. It takes a toll on your body, not only on your psychology, but on your body. Now, I'm just going to share with you a little bit of our theory of change. So RULER is an acronym for the skills of emotional intelligence, and I'll get into that in just a moment. Essentially, it's about skills and tools and pedagogy. And what we've learned that if we really want to make a difference in a school, and I learned this the hard way, because I was a person who went into education because I wanted to pretty much save myself, like all psychologists do. And I wrote a curriculum for middle schoolers because I suffered in middle school. And I tried to implement it. I was like, if you know the show, the play Death of a Salesman? I am the Willy Loman of emotional intelligence. I would schlep through the streets with my little bags and my posters and my little curriculum books, and I'd knock on schools, and it was my uncle and me, because my uncle was an educator who inspired me, who was doing this work. And I tried to get these middle schools to do it. And all of a sudden, we had these words like alienation. Teach kids about, I was alienated all the time. I want them to know what it means and have strategies to deal with it. Anxiety, frustration, all those words. And the teachers back, and this is like in the mid-90s, they said things like, not my job to talk about alienation. I'm not going there. Or anxiety. My father was anxious. I'm anxious. I don't want to, if I talk, it's opening Pandora's box. It's all going to come out. It's going to cause all these problems. So I was like, all right, not working. What do we got to do? We got to get the teachers to develop their own emotional skills. Because how many of you had a formal emotion education? It's like, what does even that mean? Like an emotion education? It's like foreign language. All right, so we started building programs for teachers, and we had more success. I don't know about you, but I've met some interesting principals in my career. Principals who say, I want to introduce you to Marc. He's going to be teaching all of you how to regulate better. and then they leave to go to office. I'm like, that's not going to work. Like, that's not going to work. And then the teachers would come up to you and be like, my principal told us basically, like, you're here because, whatever, but, like, we can't do this until after the test in May. Like, well, the school year ends in June. So, like, it's August. Like, I don't know. Like, I think I'm wasting my time. So then we said, all right, we got to get those principals. Got to train those principals. All of a sudden, we had more luck. We had better implementation. We had better quality because the leaders were then living it and being the role models. And then the teachers were like, wow, my principal is actually regulating more effectively. I want to do that too. And then the teachers were more motivated to do it in the classrooms. And then we got offers to do districts like New York City. And I had the superintendent of special education come up to me. She's like, Marc, I want this in 350 schools across the 5 boroughs. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. I have no idea. So we said we got to build the systems and train the trainers, and so we started realizing that it wasn't about the program, right? It had nothing to do with the program. It was really about infusing emotion science, emotion skills, and tools into the immune system of the school. And that's what we discovered, and it took us way too long to figure it out. That's about training leaders and educating staff. It's about, yes, you got to integrate it into classroom instruction. Yes, you have to also make it part of the policies. Because I was in schools where these teachers were doing such a great job with it, and then if the kids got into a fight, go into the principal's office, and the principal's going to yell at the kids and suspend the kids. It's like, wait a minute here, like, we're teaching the skills here, but like this person doesn't get trained, they don't know what to do. So that's a weird message. There's no common language and common training for all stakeholders. And then you've got to get the families involved too. Because if we don't teach families, then the skills don't continue at home. And then what we find is that 3 things kind of emerged in terms of our work. 1, you got to work on people's mindsets around emotions. It's unbelievable, but not everybody believes that how people feel matters. So, I mean, it's crazy. I shared last night a story. So at my own university, I'm in the Department of Medicine, and one of the chairs of the surgery department asked me to give a talk. And he said, you know, the surgery department, they could really use some training. Not a problem. So I decided, yeah, sure, I'll do it. I gave a talk, something like this, to the surgeons. At the end of my talk, which I thought was pretty good, older surgeon gets up. I'm serious. And this is what he says to me. Marc, what happened to Yale? Right? And I was like, okay, like, where's this going? And he goes, this is Yale. We're about producing Nobel laureates, not nice people. Right? This is the truth. I couldn't make this stuff up. I remember I looked over at the chair that I'm like, is this like a practical joke to see how skilled I am? And I decided, I got some facilitation skills. I said, does anyone else have a different feeling about my presentation? Another one of these winners stands up. And he looks at me and he goes, you know something, Marc? Here's what I learned. Sometimes you have to be a blank. Because then people just shut up and listen and do what you tell them to do. All right. So now you know why I'll have a career that lasts, beyond my lifetime. And because if that's the mindset that person has, how do you think that person is treating people? How many of you want to work for that person? I'll show you some data on that in a minute. So it's about getting people on the bus. I call it the Emotions Matter bus. 2, it's about developing the skills. Right? There are specific skills, which we'll get into in a moment. But you can't just develop one teacher's skills. That's what I learned. Because they're in an ecosystem, right? If people around them aren't also developing, it's probably not going to have sustainability, right? That long-lasting effect. So you've got to shift that culture and climate. So it's about belief systems, it's about deepening the skills, and shifting the climate. And then my own and others' research shows all those outcomes that we care about come to fruition. You get better outcomes for teachers, you get better outcomes for kids. Now, the big question is, why do we care? That first piece around mindsets. There are 5 reasons why we care. Because 350,000 studies over the last 25 years have shown that emotions matter for a lot of things. The first is attention, memory, and learning. Think about it. How you're feeling right now is driving your attentional capacity. Right? If you're bored, your brain is trying to make predictions about something, and it's like, get me out of here. I'm going to think about what I'm doing next weekend. Because your brain wants to always work. It's built to be productive. But if it's not stimulated, it does other things. It goes in its own directions. Simple. If you're overwhelmed and stressed, right, you're having that fight-flight response constantly, which is adaptive, as you know, for short-term purposes. If I'm in the middle of a dangerous neighborhood, I'm going to check. I'm going to get on alert. I want to protect myself. But if I'm like this all day long in school, probably not the best for my health and well-being and my learning. it's funny because I go back in my own childhood and I say, why was I not a good student? I was a terrible student in my middle school, C and D student. I know you're thinking to yourself, how is that possible? Right? But the truth is, I am pretty smart. I mean, let's just call it what it is. But my emotion system overrode my cognitive system. I couldn't focus. I was like, get me out of here. Who am I going to get home safely today? Who's going to be my protector? That's what I cared about. I didn't care about the Roman oligarchy. Why would I care about that if I can't even get home safely? Decision making. We've done research, for example, with teachers, and what we've done, for example, is we've randomly assigned them to be in different mood states. Good mood, bad mood. Simple. Write about a great day while you're teaching, write about a really crappy day. It works like a charm to just do that quick mood induction. And then we gave the teachers in these different mood states the same exact essay to grade. Any thoughts about the differences in the grades? What we found was a 1.5 average difference in grades that the teachers assigned. Interesting. But more interestingly, because I kind of knew it was going to happen, because I understand the whole emotion cognition thing. But at the end of the study, I said to the teachers, do you believe that how you felt influenced how you graded? About 90% said no. They said, why would that, like writing about a good day or bad day, like why would that influence how I evaluate an essay? Like I do this every day. So what does that tell us? What it tells us, and other studies that we've since done, is that how we feel, right, has an influence over the way we think and the choices we make, but it happens oftentimes outside of our conscious awareness. Now I ask you to think about the implications for that in the classroom. Relationship quality. What we say is that emotions are signals. They tell us to approach or to avoid. Very simple. Anyone here ever work with someone who looks like this? And how many of you, when you're looking at my facial expression, is saying, I just want to work with Marc for the rest of my life, right? You don't want to be around people that display those kinds of emotions. Why is that? Because they send signals. They say, avoid, avoid, avoid. He doesn't care. He's not respectful. He thinks he's got more power. The problem with this is that when it comes to being emotionally intelligent with children, it actually sends the reverse message, right? They make that kind of face. It makes you want to stay away. But what are they really saying? I need help. I need support. So it's an interesting dilemma. Physical and mental health. What we've learned in our research, now we're doing this big study across my state of Connecticut with 12 universities. Because what the aggregate data show across all of our universities is that every year for the last 6 years, there's been a 20% increase in undergraduates seeking mental health treatment. At Yale alone, if you're an undergraduate at my university, 50% of you will seek mental health treatment before you graduate. That's a lot. That's a lot of counselors and a lot of support. Now going back to mindsets for a minute, I find that very problematic. Other people don't necessarily agree with me at my university, which makes me angry. I'm working on my regulation. Now, why they don't agree is kind of interesting in of itself. But think about that. Every year for the last 6 years, 20% increase. So I presented that finding to the child psychiatrist in our university. And one of the responses was, well, Marc, it's obvious. We got, huge mental health problems. And as a matter of fact, our department predicts that we need to train a minimum of 8,000 more child psychiatrists over the next 10 years. And I looked at this guy and I'm like, my job is to put you out of business. Like, I don't understand, like, if that's your mindset, like, we're just going to train more child psychiatrists to deal with all the stress and mental health problems, but we're not going to think about, like, what's going on? What are people drinking in the water? What is the systems like that are supporting these kids? We got some problems. And finally, performance and creativity. I ask you to think about your own performance and creativity when you're tired and you're bored and you're frustrated and you're overwhelmed. It's tough. Now, life, by the way, is replete with negative emotions. I mean, I'm angry a lot these days. I'm just lucky that I have a lot of strategies to help me manage it, and I perceive injustices as opportunities. It's a very different way of appraising it, however, than most people, unfortunately, who don't have the strategies. What we find among high school students is that if they don't have the strategies to regulate, they tend to give up more faster. They tend to not persist. So people think oftentimes that it might be the grit that pushes them forward. And while grit is an important factor in people's lives, what I find in my research is that it's not the predictor of their creativity and their academics. It's the emotion regulation. It's having a wider range of effective strategies to support them in dealing with the disappointment, the frustration, the feelings of being overwhelmed, the anxiety, the negative feedback. Has anyone here ever gotten harsh feedback? Like someone tells you they don't like your performance? It can be really difficult, can't it? I had someone in my own town near me, a superintendent, say, "I don't like your approach." And I was like, "I don't like you." Not a problem. We don't have to work together. You can damage all the kids in your district all you want. I have strong feelings about this stuff, as you can see. 10 years of therapy was not enough. So the big question I think people have is, what are the skills? When you think about people who are emotionally skilled, like what are the underlying skills? And that's where the theory of emotional intelligence came about. And I was just very blessed that when I was searching for who I was and trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, I approached two people. And they were both these theorists who were the founders of the theory of emotional intelligence, named Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer. Peter is now the president of Yale, and Jack Mayer is a professor at the University of New Hampshire. And interestingly enough, when I applied for my position, to go to graduate school, I got rejected from Yale. I didn't have the SAT scores or the GRE scores for graduate school. I didn't have the grade point average because I was not a good student. So they weren't going to make the bet on me. It's interesting, when I got my full professor and tenure and the president gave a speech, I was like, just want you to remember, like, you rejected me 15 years ago. He's a close friend, and I'm very privileged now. When we think about the underlying skills, what are they? Right? It's about accurately recognizing emotions. Let's think about that. Identifying emotion by interpreting facial expressions and body language and my own self-awareness in terms of what's going on in my body, what's going on in my mind. It's about understanding the causes and the consequences of emotion. Like, why am I feeling angry? Why am I disappointed? What's the theme for stressed versus overwhelmed? Disappointment versus anger, jealousy versus envy, ecstatic versus excited. So that means you've got to have the language to describe the full range of emotions. Nuanced, specific. We say you have to name it to tame it. It's knowing how and when to express emotions. There are rules around expressing emotions, aren't there? Cultural rules, family rules. I walk into schools all the time, and it fascinates me about the different rules that are happening. I went to one school recently in Philadelphia, and the assistant looked at me and she goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm here to see your principal." "Go sit over there." Not a problem. Not a problem. What was interesting is that when the principal came out, he's like, "I overheard that." I'm like, "It's kind of interesting, right?" And he goes, "She really needs your training." I said, "Well, we should talk about it." So, and then I go to other schools, and you're like, "Morning, welcome, oh my goodness, da-da-da." Totally different feeling, right? That's a feeling at a cultural, climate level. We also express our emotions based on our temperament and our personalities. I'm more introverted than people think I am because I do these kinds of speeches. So people think, "Oh, he's so outgoing. He's going to want to go to a bar and party." I'm like, ugh. I want to disappear, right? I don't even like people. I like people, but I just don't like to be around them for too long. It's just individual differences. You got to respect it. So lots of things influence this work. I have two older brothers, and it's like we came from different parents, it feels like. I'm super comfortable now talking about my feelings, as you can see. Like, it's just who I am. It's what I do. My older brothers, successful. One's a scientist at a pharmaceutical company. The other one's a doctor. They came to hear me speak once because they really didn't know what I do because they were older and they weren't around when I was a kid, actually. And my one brother, after my presentation was over, he's like, "What are you doing?" Right? And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like you just share too much. Like when you talked about mommy being neurotic and daddy being angry and how you were bullied and this and this and this and this. Like people should not know about that you. People should not know that about you. And they went a step further. My one brother looked at me and he goes, "You know something, Mark? Here's the deal. I don't think your center's going to do well if you keep talking like this in public. And to take it further, people are going to think you're weak." Think about that. My older brother, people are going to think you're weak. And I looked at my brother and I said, "Hey, Dave, like in my department, we call that projection." Right? Like, I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. So we have to think about this, right? It's very layered. It's like personal, it's social, it's cultural. I say be a scientist, not a judge. Go in as the learner, not the knower, and you'll make less mistakes. Because the goal is not to always be correct. It's about making fewer mistakes. Which leads us to the big one, the regulation of emotion. You could spend months, if not years, talking about emotion regulation. The way we think about it is it's the thoughts or the cognitions and the actions or the behaviors that we use to prevent unwanted emotions. So being anticipatory, kind of antecedent focused in a James Gross model of emotion management. Reducing difficult ones. As teachers, don't we have to sometimes just create emotions? Like, we gotta go do this and just put the music on and change the atmosphere. Sometimes you want to just maintain a positive emotion or a negative emotion. It's interesting because a lot of people want to pull the negative emotions away, don't they? I lost two very important, I lost my dad 3 years ago and my uncle 2 years ago, both important people in my life. And it was amazing to me how many people just came up to me and were like, I had this one professor, it was my best ever. He came up to me and he's like, "I heard about your dad." I said, "Yeah, thanks." He goes, "Aren't you glad you teach those skills?" And I was like, I don't really understand what you're talking about. And it was like, his message was like, regulate, get rid of the feeling, right? Get rid of the feeling. That's a mindset, right? We got to get rid of our negative emotions. Negative emotions are bad. Completely wrong way of thinking about emotions, right? All emotions have utility. We just don't want to feel them all the time, right? We don't want to be anxious all the time, but a little anxiety, not bad for planning a party. I like when my assistant's like nervous about the event. Just a little bit. I don't want to have a breakdown, but I want her to be a little nervous. She's going to be more detail focused. So, what do we know about kids and adults? Well, for children, we find is that those who are lower in emotional intelligence look like the column on the left. Those who are higher in emotional intelligence look like the column on the right. Lots of studies. Now, I've been really interested in principals' emotional intelligence. So what we did is a study where we analyzed the principals' emotion skills, and then we had all the teachers take our emotional intelligence surveys. So remember earlier I showed you frustrated, overwhelmed, and stressed for the teacher population? Well, now let's take a look at these data. When you disaggregate them, and you take a low emotionally intelligent principal and a highly emotionally intelligent principal, and let's see if there's a difference. Who do you want to work for? Those Wordles are quite different, qualitatively, aren't they? Look at that frustration level. You can't even see happy here. It's not that it's not like the highly emotionally intelligent leader just wipes away all of your negative emotions, right? They're just fewer, but they're also helping you experience more positive emotions. So let's look at that in more detail. Look at that. About 3.8 versus 4.4 in terms of general positive emotions. How about job satisfaction? About 1.5 points difference in job satisfaction. How about, I want to get out of this teaching profession? 1.5 points difference. And then we looked at, which I don't have all the data here yet, is that if you have a principal who's high in emotional intelligence and you embed the principles of social and emotional learning into your school, is it even different? And look at that. What you get is that the low EI principle that does not infuse social and emotional learning has teachers who are here around job satisfaction. The high SAL implementation with a high EI principle, almost 2 full points difference. Do they resonate with you as a faculty and staff and teachers of education? I think it's kind of interesting. So let me wrap up my presentation by just saying a few things. 1, RULER is an acronym that stands for the skills of emotion. It's also the approach that we have built to teach emotional intelligence. I'm going to briefly run through some of the things that we do. 1, we see traditional approaches focusing more on buying a kit and having rules and having behavior modification stuff and assemblies and weekly lessons and typically poor implementation fidelity. Where we say, you got to have theory. You got to have some evidence base. You got to involve everybody. You got to shift the mindsets and build the skills and create a positive climate. You got to infuse a developmentally appropriate system into the school. It's got to be culture responsive. You want to think about how this enhances learning standards. Integrate into a school's mission, vision, and policies. It's got to be customizable. So we have a school here, Girton Grammar, who is our first school here in Australia. When they came to Yale for 2 days of training, and they came back and they made it their own. It was mind-blowing to me. They used the tools, but they made them their own. And we now have some other schools like Mentone Grammar and others have come on board now. And what we see is that if it's a kit, it doesn't really honor the teacher. As a professor, I would be irritated if someone said, here's your new curriculum. Go do it. I don't know, that doesn't feel like you value me or that you trust me. So why don't we give people the skills and the tools and the strategies and show them the ways to integrate it, but then help them make it their own. And that's aligned with the way we think about the field of social and emotional learning. That it's about instruction, it's about school-wide policies and learning, and it's about family, community, and standards. So RULER is a set of tools that look different across different schools. The first one is called the Charter, which is focused on building a positive climate. The second one is called the Mood Meter, which focuses on building self-awareness and social awareness. The Meta Moment is our tool for managing difficult emotions, and the Blueprint is for social problem solving and perspective taking. So it looks like this. Too many rules, not enough feelings. That's my theory. Too many rules, not enough feelings. Ask people how they want to feel and create the learning environments where they feel that way. This is an example of 2 schools. That's a high school in New York City. That is an elementary school in Harlem, New York. The teachers in that school want to feel supported, appreciated, peaceful, interested, empowered, understood, appreciated, etc. Think about that. Ask a principal asking their teachers, how do you want to feel? And then helping to create the environment where everyone can feel that way. At the classroom level, this is a 5th grade classroom. They want to feel confident and creative and focused and ecstatic. Some schools get very creative with this. At a high school level, they want to be spirited and united and respected and determined and empowered. The Mood Meter helps build social and self-awareness, building that emotion vocabulary, integrating what we call feeling words into the curriculum so that every year students are learning age-appropriate, more advanced words to describe their inner life. So that by the time they get to middle school, they have 25 emotion concepts for that Mood Meter. It's also about teaching teachers the role of emotion science in learning, that different emotions are useful for different types of learning activities. It's also about developing strategies to manage the full range of emotions, to feel more or less of different emotions. You can see how it integrates directly into the curriculum, doing text-based analysis using the Mood Meter, making it personalized, integrating it into art. Just amazing things that you can do with this work that you just can never plan. As a matter of fact, in one of the schools that we work with in Seattle, the woman who was in charge of attendance was trained in the Mood Meter. And every time a kid comes in late, she plots the kid on the Mood Meter, asks them how they're feeling, and then she says, well, let's go to the strategy wall. You're probably a little flustered. You seem flustered. You seem a little frustrated because you got here late. Let's give you a strategy so that when you get to class, you can be more present. Pretty good. We even developed an app for that. We have a third tool we call the Meta Moment, dealing with those difficult triggers. The meta moment says, let's think about activating our best possible self. Think about that. When you're tired and you're hungry and you're overwhelmed and you have no resources left, we find you need a little extra support to regulate. Activating your best self and our new experiment shows that you tend to choose a more adaptive strategy when that happens. Some schools have these exercises where we're reaching for our best selves. Obviously, the list goes on. There's a tool for problem solving because oftentimes when there's conflict, right, it's not just about you, it's about the relationship. We have to repair that relationship. Sometimes it's cultural differences, sometimes it's just misunderstanding of each other's emotions. At the high school level, we get a lot more personal. Thinking about, like, who am I? Where do I want to go? What's my vision for my high school career? With relationships, with academics, with extracurricular, with sports. And what are the skills to get there? I'll wrap up by saying just a few last things. One, this is a process. It's not something you purchase. Obviously, you need lots of training, and you have to take it slow. So Girton is in their 7th year, I think, at this point, and it's still a work in progress. It's still teachers leave, teachers come, different heads leave, come and go. Mentone is in their 2nd year, I think, or 3rd or 4th year, right? It's a process. It's about making it part of the immune system, not about doing it. It's not like, I don't care if you have a mood meter poster on your wall. I care that every kid in that school has the ability to label his or her emotions. I care that every kid in that school has strategies to manage them. So you can see it's from getting district leaders in the states from like big districts to introducing it to building teams to training educator staff to classroom integration families to embedding it into the policies. Lastly, we have data on this. There is good data to show that doing this work makes a difference, from student outcomes to teacher outcomes to classroom level outcomes like bullying in the school to just observable videotaped analysis of the positivity or negativity in the classroom climate. So let me wrap up. Last slide. 1, in our view, emotions are pretty darn important. Let me get a quick raise of hands. Is Melbourne that different? How many of you believe that emotions matter? Your hands are like this. It's like, come on, I need confidence. All right, I should make you do the vocal tone for emotions matter. Second, oftentimes emotional intelligence is seen as a soft skill. That makes me crazy. It's also seen by economists as non-cognitive. I don't even understand what that means. I just don't get it. Right? Your emotion system, my dear Dean, and your cognitive system, they're in the brain together. Right? They're inextricably linked. They can work like this, or they can mesh, and you can have one system inform the other, and vice versa, to help you achieve your goals. Third, it's never too early or too late to develop these skills. I promise you. I would say if I were to try to learn, let's say, Chinese right now, the areas of my brain responsible for hearing that tone and building that vocabulary or the understanding the symbols, they're just not there like they would have been when I was 10 years old. You can always learn a new word to describe your feelings. You can always try a new strategy to help you manage your emotions more effectively. Fourth, there are creative ways to do this. Ruler is just the approach that I spent my life developing. There are many approaches that are evidence-based, that are effective. You have some of them here in your own country. And finally, I have pretty big goals in life. Whether they come true or not, I'm not sure. I do believe that emotions are the other side of the report card. I think that we spend way too much time thinking about maths and literacy and other subject areas, and that if we spent more time thinking about children's emotions, that not only would they become academically successful, but maybe, just maybe, their dreams would come true. Thank you. Thank you.
I think my name's Erica Frydenberg, and I'm a colleague of Marc's, as you heard, located in the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. One word that you didn't use, one emotion word, was entertained.
Oh.
And I think we have been entertained. At the same time, I think, firstly, I wanted to say, Jim, thank you very much for inviting Marc. And I was going to use the word, we're so honoured to have Marc for the First Dean's lecture. But really, Marc is not the sort of person that we say honoured. I think we say thank you, you're appreciated.
Thank you. See that?
Just to use your own words, I've heard Marc talk on many occasions, and he comes from Yale, and Yale is, and he's made an allusion to the fact that real emotional intelligence has emanated from Yale University. Those of you who are psychologists, Salovia Mayer, really started this work at Yale, and obviously it's being continued in a grand way. Marc has been in Australia a number of times. He's referred to the wonderful work that Girton's doing, Mentone. There are some amazing developments also, because Marc's just done 2-day workshops, and I happened to hear a few snippets and meet a few people. Tasmania, Cobram, Shepparton are already on board. And why I want to say that to you, because I know that Bridgeport, Connecticut, where Marc has done a lot of work, and that's close to Yale, is a really complex socio-economic community. But some of our complex socio-economic communities are also looking at this work, which is really very promising. So Marc, thank you. You're really appreciated. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you.
And I'm sure you will be back in Australia. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.